welcome to Green Signals from me, Nigel Harris, in a terribly grey and dank, the Scots call it dreich, don't they, weather, and from, for the first time...
Yeah, Richard Bowker. It is a bit grey and miserable here, but it is at least Wiltshire and not Derbyshire. We have moved.
And I was very impressed at the speed with which you accomplished it all.
Yeah, we
like
managed.
A swan, was it? All serene on the surface and furious activity underneath.
It was.
Where have you put that wok?
Was not a phrase that was used, but there was some very similar to it. No, it went well. We're still friends at the end, but we were a bit jiggered. But it was great to be in for Christmas.
Jolly good. And was it a pleasant Christmas and New Year, Richard? Did you have plenty of sprouts?
Oh, plenty of sprouts. It was a lovely Christmas and New Year. My cousin and his wife were over for Christmas, which was terrific. He's a barrister, but he's also a bit of a closet rail enthusiast as well.
All right.
So yeah, and we had a great time actually. So no, it was all quite calm and all yeah, it was terrific actually. You?
It was fine. It was very quiet. I spent quite a few days after Christmas catching up with stuff here. I had a splendid Christmas lunch with Steph and her family, of all people. That was very kind, so that was really good.
Oh, feeling slightly left out.
It was really pleasant, and had a really good day. It's good to see her parents again and her children. So that was really great. Thanks for Steph for that. And here we go with season 2, Richard.
Do you know, I've really missed... The one thing that was bad about Christmas was that I missed doing this. And it was only for a week. But isn't it terrible? You think you just get into a rhythm and enjoying it so much. And a week was just kind of a long time. So, yeah.
And in that time, of course, things have built up, which explains why we're doing things rather differently this year. So successful has the launch of Green Signals been, and we're so pleased with that. We're very touched with the response. Many supportive comments from so many listeners and watchers that we've decided to expand. And no, that's not just because of an over-generous Christmas lunch either, though I'm sure that applies. The big interviews with our guests have proved extremely popular. But the trouble is, condensing so much fantastic material into the time we have, especially if we want to include some chat or blather about the week's events and news, has proved pretty challenging. We don't want to compress the good stuff. We don't want the podcast to be too long. So we've pinched a format idea from another well-known and successful podcast, mentioning no names, so I'll refer to it only as The Rest is Politics. Thanks, Alistair and Rory, and split the big interviews away from the other more magazine-y style elements of the show. As a result, here is this week's interview-free magazine-style show, and we're looking forward to it immensely. We're going to cover, and there's plenty to cover, so take a deep breath. Among other things, the great Christmas getaway on the roads, rail disruption, can't even say it now, over the Christmas break, Richard's Monsal Trail pioneering video, and an interesting fact about Dr Beeching, storm damage, HSTs, more cuts for top budgets, New Year's honours, predicting what rail-hating Rishi might be coming up with this year, and a new feature, our weekly quiz, which is just a bit of fun, but you'll have to listen to the end for that. Of course, this means we'll be producing 2 shows for the price of 1, so be sure to like and subscribe on your channel of choice. It helps us grow the channel and produce more stuff, but it also helps you to get instant notification when new episodes drop, and we do not want you to miss one. We had some fantastic comments, didn't we, Richard, over the festive break on stuff we've done up to now, in particular about our listener questions Christmas special, which was a bit zoo podcast, but it worked quite well, and I think you seem to like it. Peter Wren said, that was great fun. The episode flew past. We agree. It was great fun to do. Alan Morton, one of our super listeners, said, Green Signals has been a great listen this year, covering topics in detail that others rarely mention and making deep dives into various railway issues. I do like the expression deep dives, Richard.
It's good, isn't it?
It is. On the subject of the great sprout debate, Mark Townend said, I'm with Richard on this. I also love sprouts, the best part of the traditional Christmas meal, IMHO, along with the stuffing. No, it isn't, but you're entitled to your opinion. I suppose that makes you very happy, Richard.
Happy and vindicated, I would say.
Vindicated. In praise of the bloody sprout. Yes, okay. Finally, my old friend Steve Marr, a director of the Lakeside and Haverthwaite Railway and owner of Fairburn tank number 42085, messaged to say, Nigel, I'm already thoroughly enjoying the Green Signals podcast. It is terrific to get honest and factual information and analysis on the big railway issues in an easy-to-listen-to format. So I hope it goes from strength to strength. Well, look, thanks, Steve. That's exactly, you've encapsulated there what Richard and I are trying to do. So I look forward to seeing you again soon, maybe even on an LHR footplate. And yes, in case you were wondering, that is a hint. And so to the news. Richard and I are going to bat these back and forth and just express our opinion, which we know you'll be dying to hear. The Great Christmas Getaway. Just before Christmas, about a week beforehand, the RAC said there'd be 20 million car journeys up until Christmas Eve, about 4 days at that point, and that is up 20% on last year. Well, there's an argument that this signifies an increasing frustration of the public towards the railway because unreliable, late or non-existent services have a consequence. What say you, Mr. B?
Yeah, well, it can't have helped, can it? I think there's an interesting argument about cause and effect. So if you look at car ownership and car journeys, they've kind of continued to rise year on year. You know, not just this year. Do you remember when we were in front of the Transport Select Committee? We were talking about the impact of car ownership and the change. And I thought that was some absolutely extraordinary number. Like it'd gone from something like, I'll probably get the numbers wrong now, but it was something like 30 million cars on the road had become 40 million cars in about 15 years, whatever it was. So did the railways cause the number to go up this year, or has the number been going up? And what is it, chicken and egg? I don't know. But tell you what, it was a nightmare on the roads, and the rail disruption kind of helped, can it?
No, I mean it's a stressful time to travel at the best of times, even if the trains run on time. If you're wondering whether they're going to turn up, whether they're going to get there, whether they're going to be stopped, whether you're going to be put on a bus, it's the car looks like a pretty good option.
It does.
So that leads us kind of neatly on, doesn't it, to rail disruption over the winter break. As you just said, Richard, it can't have helped people's mood. I mean, we get I think people are used to the Christmas engineering work. But it always makes me smile when people say they're used to something, because if somebody kicked your backside every 5 minutes, you get used to that after a bit, but you don't have to like it, do you?
No.
So there was the Christmas engineering, but then you get the wild cards thrown in, don't you? Ebbsfleet and that awful flooding in both tunnels, which I still haven't heard an adequate explanation for. Have you?
No. Odd, wasn't it? Because it looked like it was flowing through the passageway between the tunnels. So that was a bit weird. And then you sort of see stuff coming from the roof, stuff coming from the ground. This is a relatively new piece of infrastructure. So, I mean, there will be an investigation. I mean, it may be already have happened. We don't know. And in fairness to, the communication, certainly from Southeastern was pretty good. I mean, Steve White's stuff was very good. Well, but we need to know what happened there, because that was it gave the media something to beat everybody over the head with, and that's just kind of, it just felt a bit own goaly.
Well, there's never a good time to interrupt people's journeys to and from the continent, but Christmas is the worst, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Interrupting family get-togethers and those dreadful scenes at St Pancras of it, just like a sea of faces of people. I mean, it must be very tense and angry, and you've got to feel sorry for the staff who do the best, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, if you've got, for those who've got young kids, and I mean that adds to the sort of stress of the whole experience as well. It wasn't just Ebbsfleet. Did you see that one? It was on the East Coast Main Line, I think. I think David Horn tweeted this one, and I mean they do social media very well, so their communications and explaining things is excellent. So this isn't a go at that at all. But there was a section of flooding. So it was kind of a bit similar to the Ebbsfleet thing. It's always water, isn't it? Which think it's a bit of a worry with, sort of climate resilience and so on, but that's kind of a separate topic. The one on the East Coast Main Line was fascinating. So it was David's picture showed flooding water. It hadn't covered the railhead, but there was
not
quite
even
a lot.
Covered the sleepers in some cases, but it was flowing slowly, wasn't it?
Well, I couldn't really tell that from the photo. I mean, I know you thought that, but let's say it was a bit. But the point was, it had caused the railway to come to a halt. And so, having put that picture up, awful lot of comment on it, some informed, some less informed, saying, well, hang on a minute, in the old days, we'd have just kind of gone through that under caution. And then a number of, the water's not flowing fast. And then a couple of other people saying, yeah, but, we don't know what's around the corner. It was on a bend. You kind of, I had sympathy for both views, actually.
Yeah.
I thought that was fair enough. But it did make me think. I just wonder whether it's not just a railway thing. Maybe this is a society thing. I think we've become quite good at finding reasons to stop doing things. And
giving up too early.
Yeah. And David, and your team at East Coast, if you're listening, this is not a comment about that specific issue. It's a general one. And I think it is something that's worth looking at, because it wasn't just that issue on East Coast. There were other places where it kind of, it just sort of stopped, and you kind of go, yeah, I think we've got to find ways to keep it going if we can. And I'm sure people are doing that, but it just felt a bit kind of
the
grim.
Railway traditionally, the trains always got through, didn't they? Keeping the line open was an absolute priority, whereas has risk aversion replaced risk management?
Possibly, but I think the other issue, and there's some of the comments that were made were about this, post very tragic incidents like Carmont, where it maybe there's more that you can't see now, is a relevant factor, and the rule book's been modified accordingly, and but it does. I'm always reminded now, every time I see one of these things, of the point you picked up on that Andrew Haynes said after the Paddington de-wirement debacle.
Too many actors
looking at risk from their own perspectives. I think that was a very insightful comment, and it is one where I think 2024 we need to seriously consider a unified directing mind to actually take charge of many of these situations. But then that's probably a whole debate in itself, isn't it?
Well, it is. But I think you're quite right, because the too many actors acting with risk from their own point of view, that means that somebody, a human being, at some point in the organisation has to take the decision to go or no go, or stop or not stop. And that's a very responsible thing to do. If you call it wrong and there's a risk of the responsibility or the accountability for that ending up back on your desk, you're going to take the safest option, aren't you? Whereas if there is a directing mind saying, we are going to do this. On that subject, did you see, I think it was yesterday, he keeps cropping up in these programmes, doesn't he? Graham Eccles put about a 10-tweet thread about how the railway should be reorganised in this year. And he also used the expression directive mind, and there was a lot of real support for it on Twitter.
There was. I read that tweet and I went, yep.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Exactly. It's one of
the ball as you go down,
You turn into the equivalent to one of those nodding dogs in the back of the car, don't you?
It was a
nodding
bit.
at it. But, I mean, Graham's just brilliant. He absolutely called it. And let us hope. I was going to say that Sunak and Merriman ought to be reading. Maybe we ought to make sure that Louise Haigh sees it.
Yeah. Good point.
Because. One last point. I absolutely agree with your comment about LNER's social media. They have got a very good social media operation. But David in particular, without shooting too much sunshine up his rear end, is absolutely brilliant in these circumstances. He always tweets personally, in addition to the railway's own social media operation. And he just continues to lead from the front. I smiled, I think, a week before that on his way home. There's a picture of him. He was keeping his hand in by serving in the T-bar.
Yeah, I saw that. That was nice. That was good.
You know, and that's real leading from the front.
Yeah,
And people have got time for that and they respect it. So well done, David. Keep it up. Keep it up. But yes, I think the days for a guiding mind have gone, and it does need a directing mind now. Somebody to really take charge and make a decision on behalf of everybody so we don't get this disparate mess as we had at Paddington that day. So, your pioneering little video at Monsal Trail, and I never thought I'd say this on a Green Signals podcast, complete with heavy breathing, went down extremely well. With lots of good views and some great comments. You were very lucky. Well, you know you weren't very lucky. You chose a good day to go and do it with all that sun and frost.
I think the day chose me, really. I know I woke up. We'd had a really grim couple of days, and it was so beautiful. I thought, right, I've just got to do it. And I went out. I'm sorry for the heavy breathing. You're right, it was, but flipping heck.
It was a steep path.
Well, that was a steep path. It was also really, really cold. I mean, Baltic, I believe, is the expression, but it probably was. We did get some great comments, actually. And they're really nice because, you know, you learn from stuff, and there were some really good constructive comments as well. So thank you for those. But one that really caught my eye was a guy, I think on YouTube, said, do you realise that Beeching never actually included that line on the list of closures in his famous report, The Reshaping of British Railways? I thought, better go and have a look. I didn't doubt him, but I was, a bit surprised. Went and had a look, and sure enough, he was absolutely right. It was not slated for closure, although the local service was. But really interestingly, there was a second Beeching report, you'll recall, in 65. It was the one that talked about liner trains and stuff like that.
And merry-go-rounds.
And merry-go-rounds, yeah. And in that report, he actually uses railways across the Pennines and across the Peak as an example of focusing on upgrading some lines and not on others. And it's in that particular example. It's there, the Peak Forest line, he refers to it as. And sure enough, it's not slated for closure in that either. And in fact, there's some maps in that second report that predict what the network's going to look like in 1984, and it's still there. So it's really interesting. It was exactly as the guy said. It wasn't slated for closure. Barbara Castle, Labour Secretary of State, closed it anyway. So there you go.
He didn't list Woodhead for closure either, did he?
No, I say worse. Opposite to that, in his example of Transpennine routes for freight, it was Woodhead that he singled out for where the investment should go with the upgrade. Now, of course, what he wouldn't know was that same merry-go-round traffic in 1981 or 1989 would just disappear, right, and literally remove the real reason for the line's survival. But he didn't know that in 1965. So absolutely fascinating. I've bought the report. I've got a copy winging its way to me. I'm going to have a good look, actually, and see if there's other little things there that I never knew.
Nuggets. Well, of course, he didn't. He proposed Blackpool North line for closure and the retention of Blackpool Central. And the terminus there was literally right on the front, perfectly sited. Right. Barry McLaughlin, former editor of Steam World, wrote a lovely little book about it because there's no easy way to say this. It was sort of blamed on local authority corruption, really. That they wanted the land for a coach park and the route out to Blackpool South and beyond for the M55 link road, and went ahead and did that, even though Blackpool North is far less well placed for the sort of the holiday traffic. Interesting little factoid about the Woodhead route. Richard Gibbon, the former chief mechanical engineer at the National Railway Museum, because they got one of the locomotives in there, haven't they?
Yeah.
In BR Black. And he told me, because it was 1500 volts DC with regen braking, he said somewhere in the control room there was a big dial with a needle and with an arrowhead top on it that recorded whether the power was being used and the balance between power being consumed and the power being put back into the line by the regen braking. He said there were occasions where the needle was absolutely on the zero, that the coal trains using power going up one side, the power was being replaced by the regen braking and one's going down the other.
You do realise, don't you, in explaining that my phone and your phone as well has just gone absolutely berserk with the sound of tweets of people going, there you go, criminal act, absolutely disgraceful, shouldn't have done it. So thanks for that. That's, yeah.
Because it's a railway and it should be. Yeah, but that was the whole point. It was because it was 1500 volts DC, wasn't it? And it was a non-standard system.
Yeah, but they could have changed that. I guess in the end, it was the 80s were different and the traffic had gone. But anyway, I think we should move swiftly on from this.
Controversial comment. The overhead we know was good because some of it is still in use, isn't it? Around the Piccadilly end where somebody goes over the track. I think
probably a question for an OHLE expert, but I believe you're right.
On the line up to Glossop, I'm sure. Yeah. Anyway, there you go. It's just a thought. But yes, the Twitter arty will be out in force. But there you go. On the subject of successful videos,
yes,
our Peter Townend tribute has been something of a gobsmacker. When I suggested it in the first place, I thought that you and Steph might regard it as a bit of an indulgence, but he was worth paying tribute to because it has turned into the most successful of our videos. This morning I checked on YouTube, 4,300 views, which is streets ahead of anything else. So we'd definitely be doing more. So your job, Richard, as our resident tech expert, is to figure out what it was that caught YouTube's algorithm's eye so we can do lots more of it in other videos.
That's fair enough. Madeline, my highly supportive wife, did point out that it was quite curious, she said with a twinkle in her eye, that by far our most successful video was the one that I had absolutely nothing to do with, which I thought was a little bit harsh, but I mean, factually correct, but a little bit harsh.
I've always thought Madeline was a fine woman.
Yeah, well, that was a slightly tense moment, it has to be said. So I think we should move swiftly on from that.
I think we will. So thank you for all your comments and support for the Townend video. And we will. And Peter would have been chuffed to bits, though he would never have admitted it. I think he'd have been very self-deprecating about it, whilst being quite pleased that another way of getting the Gresley message to people has been fully exploited.
Yeah.
On a more serious note, storm damage and high-speed trains. There was lousy weather across Scotland, Northern England, Wales, all along the south coast. The railway got a real battering, which it gets a lot of these days. And, of course, in Scotland, a tree blew across the track and one of the Inter7 City HSTs ran into it at Brufty Ferry. Thank God the driver was okay. A friend of mine, excuse me, driving friend from Scotland, I asked him, I said, did he see it coming and manage to get back into the engine room? He said he saw it coming and got down behind the seat.
Right.
But even there I saw some pictures of the cab, and it would not have been fun down behind the seat either.
It was messy, wasn't it?
It absolutely was. But of course, it set off a little Twitter swell, a major Twitter swell.
Oh, a major one.
HSTs.
I mean, lots of, as is always the case with these things, some sensible comments, some slightly hysterical ones. I think the best thread I saw was from a driver, actually.
Yes, I saw that. Very objective.
Well, it was objective. He didn't actually say what he thought the answer was. It was much cleverer than that. Actually, he said it's actually very, very difficult because you've got all these competing issues. On the one hand, this, on one hand, that. He wasn't trying to be clever. He was just kind of explaining why it was actually quite complicated. But it was a good analysis. It was very good analysis. I mean, I think the bottom line of it is, these are properly old trains. 1976. So it's an early 70s design. They were fantastic.
Thick end of 50 years old.
Yeah. They were fantastic in their day, and we all love them. But I don't think there's any place on the railway for them now. The problem is that Scotland need them, right? And it for me, it comes back to the fact that we still don't have a coherent rolling stock strategy, which includes cascading fleets and all that kind of stuff. You see stories about Derby in trouble, the Alstom's factory there, Hitachi having to write down the value of their new factory in the northeast. Rolling stock is just one area where we've just not got it right at all. There is no plan.
No. And interestingly and slightly ironically, It is a fact that the HSTs are in Scotland because of an effective cascade. They've been done with elsewhere, and there's 25 sets, which is part of the problem. It's not possible to just withdraw them at a stroke, replace them at a stroke, which raises some other interesting questions about what do you do to mitigate the risk in the meantime. Because, as we know in aviation, we've talked about this before, they've got stuff like TCAS, which means that planes.
Did you just say aeroplane? You did. You did.
I did, and you reacting to it means that we now can't edit it out. So
why would we want to? That was just too good.
We'll just move swiftly on.
Aye.
They've got TCAS and other devices that make sure that they don't, I nearly said it again then, that they don't fly into each other or the ground. And I kind of think that's a big issue. We should be making sure that trains don't hit anything. And one of the big things on this, of course, is line-side vegetation. Slightly, I say funny. There's nothing funny about this, but the reply was witty. When I saw the news of this, I DM'd David Horn directly, the managing director of LNER, to say, David, was that tree between the line-side fences? He said, well, it certainly was after it had fallen down. Which was, but so there's issues over trees that are outside the boundary fence, but we certainly should get rid of them within. And I believe there are procedures for compelling landlords to have trees lopped outside the boundary fence.
Well, I mean, whole system safety, isn't it? I mean, it is a system, so it's not just one element of the system that needs to be safe. It is a whole system.
Because if it hadn't hit that tree, we wouldn't even be talking about this. No. And so there's issues there which are certainly relevant in the time it's going to take to replace that fleet of 25, which is going to take quite some years. Now, after the terrible Carmont fatality of 3 and a bit years ago now, that was when Network Rail Scotland acquired its own survey helicopter, which is based at Cumbernauld and does fantastic work. Particularly after and even during bad weather, keeping an eye on the network. So that showed that the ScotRail does respond to things really quickly.
And am I right? They've got meteorologists now as well, actually.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's that in a world of increasing challenges with climate resilience. That's got to be a good thing.
That's post Carmont as well.
Right.
They do. I think they're the only people on the railway that employ their own meteorologists rather than rely on the Met Centre and all that sort of thing.
Okay.
So they've responded to Carmont to mitigate risk, and clearly something needs to do with regard to the HSTs.
It does.
There was, again, a ScotRail driver friend of mine sent me a screen grab of a local text where a lady said her daughter lives next to the railway at the point that happened. Saw the tree come down and rang the emergency number, and yet 10 minutes passed and then the HST ran into it. It is said. Now, if there's something needs investigating there, that if all traffic isn't brought to a halt less than 10 minutes after an emergency call, see, again, that's the other thing. So if there's no trees and that, we wouldn't even be talking about fiberglass cabs, because the important thing is stopping the trains hitting things, and there's clearly work to be done in mitigating for the period that that the HSTs will be still with us. It's a shame in some ways, because the Mark IIIs are a fantastic environment and product for the passenger. So there were suggestions, should there be Class 68s be used, or 67s or whatever, but you then run into problems about how do you do it at each end with, you have to run them round, or do we need to find some DVTs? Is there a role for some of the Mark IV? I just don't know, but I would hope that somebody in the railway is doing what you and I are doing and saying, well, look, let's have a brainstorm about what can we do in terms of mitigation. What are the prospects with regard to replacement stock or anything else? Because it needs doing.
It's a 1970s train. We need to do something about it.
It absolutely is. But the idea we haven't got a rolling stock strategy is just disgraceful. And again, another role for the directing mind, Richard, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Directing somebody to come up with a rolling stock plan.
Yeah.
But all, of course, we hear about moving on is cuts. I dare say you saw the FT piece.
I did. And just for those who aren't across this one, was a piece in the FT over the break period talking about ministers instructing talks through the DFT, obviously, to look at further cuts in their budgets. I think there's a view more can be done. Cuts are not the same as efficiencies, right?
Oh, no.
Efficiencies is doing the same thing or doing what you're doing, but doing it better, smarter, cheaper, all the rest of it. Cuts are stopping doing stuff. And it worries us that we're looking at cuts. I think this harks back to the whole ticket office fiasco. Yes, there was a stay of execution. That's not the same as the problem gone away. And actually, the problem does still need addressing. Let's be honest. On this show, we weren't saying that you should never shut any ticket office.
No.
What we're saying was you need to do fares reform first and then work out how best to deliver the product to the customer, because it has changed in 20, 30 years. We don't deny that. They got it the wrong way around. But that hasn't gone away as an issue. So the costs of the savings got to come from somewhere. And I just think it's back to this point about the P&L. There's nothing wrong with being a cost-effective industry and really zeroing in on your costs, right?
And everything right about it.
Well, every successful business does that. I mean, if Sir Michael O'Leary was here talking about Ryanair, I mean, there's very few people. My brother flies for Ryanair, and they are incredibly focused on cost. But because he's got a unified P&L, he's also incredibly focused on growing revenue and getting more bums on seats and all the rest of it.
Very aggressive and successfully so in growing revenues.
Indeed. So when are we going to get our P&L back in the same place? Because you can't run a successful business without doing that.
And at the minute, the DFT is responsible for costs, so they just say, no, spending any more, regardless of the fact that it could well be an investment. I mentioned once before, I know one TOC MD who left the railway because he was just weary with it. He'd suggested a scheme that could raise £3 million, but had £1 million quid for the cost. And as soon as the DFT heard that, they just said no. Even the Secretary of State, when I talked to him about it, said that was a no-brainer. The most depressing thing is he hasn't changed it.
Same Secretary of State who at the Bradshaw lecture last year said, we now need to allow the TOC MDs to manage and direct. And it's not happened. If anything, it's gone the other way. So it's almost as if there's elements of this government almost like going out of the way to hurt rail. For what reason? I don't know. I mean, you hear about this war on motorists. If that one drives me absolutely around the bend. War on motorists, giving it a break. These are most protected species of the last sort of 30, 40 years. War on motorists.
There's been no increase in fuel duty for 10 years, and that's billions of pounds given to motorists at a period where over every one of those 10 years has been at least a 5% increase in rail fares. And
by the way, just so if anybody's listening thinking, they're just a bunch of train spotters, it's not that. The railway is vitally important to the economy in this country, vitally important to our entire sort of socio-economic infrastructure, if you like. And it has an important role to play. We're not saying it's more important than anything else, but it has an important role to play. And this notion that it's kind of car just drives you around the bend. I mean,
what you like about Boris was very understood that and very pro-rail.
Yeah. Gosh, that really opened the gate, didn't it? Yeah. But look, I mean, will Labour be any different? Will it be any better? Well, we don't know yet, really. But I mean, honestly, I might regret saying this in terms of a comment, but it can't be any worse.
Well, they can be as bad. I mean, I'm not encouraged by that. It's not that long ago that Starmer was saying we will build HS2 and NPR in full. Once the government did the worst on that, he said nothing because he's like pocketing the saving, I suppose. There's no commitment from them. So no. I am not optimistic at all.
I don't want to sound like an apologist, but I mean, I suppose if I were the Labour Party at the moment, I'm not sure I would be saying exactly what I was going to do yet. Where's the real benefit for them in doing that? And so they may surprise us. I hope they do. I hope they do, but as I say, it can't get any worse than this.
And it's not helped by the fact that was that your phone went off then?
It certainly was not. But that's the beauty of a live show, right? That's the beauty of a live show, isn't it? It's
I'll just check whether it was mine. Oh, it would look like it's mine.
Oh, was
no,
it really?
Not.
Was it yours?
No, it's still switched off. It's still switched off. Okay. So from earlier. Right. Interesting. Just one thought that occurred to me en passant a few minutes ago was when we talked about cuts. Do you remember Graham Eccles when he did the show for us? He said he could do what he wanted as a very senior BR manager, providing he made the 3% savings every year that he had to make.
Yeah.
So it's nothing new, I suppose, in that respect.
But he could also, he also had the P&L was unified. Right?
Exactly.
And that's what's changed.
But I think you're right about somebody going out the way to harm rail. I think you said in our HS2 Myths programme about the fact that there was a whiff of spite about Sunak's desire to sell off the land as quickly as possible to stop anybody reversing his decision. And clearly among number 10 advisors, there is a real anti-rail feel, which Sunak has been stupid enough to buy into. And once he buys into it, then the rest of his cabinet are not going to take him on about it and argue, are they? They're just going to fall in. Yeah.
Come on, give us some positive news. We need some positive news.
Okay, there is a bit of positive news, and it's very important. Some people might think this is minor, but I don't. I think it's really important. The honours list comes in for a real load of stick, and when you see the sort of people being handed life peerages and knighthoods and all the rest of it, it does drag it into disrepute. But there's always a number of railway gongs in the honours list, and they don't go to MDs and bosses and chairmen, and they tend to go to frontline staff, to gate line staff, and tea collectors and guards and all the rest of it. And there's a couple of them I think caught your eye, wasn't there? There
were, actually, because I agree with you. I mean, that of late they have gone to the people on the front line, which is fantastic. 2 caught my eye. There were quite a few more, and we'll probably put the list of everybody, because everybody deserves a mention on our website. But the 2 that caught my eye were Rizwan Javed, who has been awarded an MBE. He's he's part of the stations team. I think he's on the Elizabeth line at the moment. He was on Great Western Railway. But he was on a Samaritan's course a few years ago. He's become he's very good at noticing people in distress and with issues. The BBC story I read said, the sort of citation suggested anything around 29, 30 people that he'd helped and possibly, saved from committing suicide or at least attempting it. So fabulous story there, and good for him. That's exactly what the honour system's for. So well done, Rizwan. Indeed. The other one that caught my eye was Edward Albom. Now, I know Edward quite well. I've known him for a number of years. Edward got an OBE. Now, Edward is 87 now, but he only
retired. Let's hear it for Edward.
He only retired as a solicitor last year. This is a proper hard-working guy, but he's been a tireless campaigner for the Settle Carlisle Railway. He founded the Settle Carlisle Trust. He led the London end of the campaign to keep the line open in the 1980s, and together with a guy called Tony Fraschini, who was the former BR engineer who really showed up the costs of Ribblehead Viaduct repairs as being wildly excessive in terms of what BR said they were going to cost. Those 2 probably did more than anyone else to save the railway. And Edward has he's just extraordinary. He set up the Settle Carlisle Railway Trust. They've restored all the stations. I mean, it's phenomenal what he's done. He's utterly tireless, doesn't seek any recognition for it, but jolly well deserved, and I'm delighted for him.
Absolutely. Sort of real people doing real work of real value.
Yeah.
Which is, you can't say a lot about that about some government ministers, can you? Well done. And we all thought it was all down to Michael Portillo.
Well, I suspect, in the end, a minister has to make a decision, and he obviously made the right one. But I rather wonder whether, had it not been for the campaign of people like Edward and Tony and others, if it had just been down to BR's recommendation, whether or not a minister would have done anything other than just simply rubber stamp that. We will never know, will we? But so we're probably being a bit unfair on Mr. Portillo, but There is no doubt that Tony and Edward in his tireless campaigning, take the lion's share of the credit.
Well, that's the key message there, isn't it? Put government in a position where they can't do anything other than the right thing.
Correct.
without looking stupid.
Correct.
Which is the message for the land sales and phase 2A of HS2, isn't it? Just relentlessly going on about that. And there's plenty of others. As you said, we'll put them in the additional resources section on the blog on the website, so we can doff our cap to each and everyone who's got a gong. It's been Christmas, hasn't it? Pantomime villains takes us neatly round to rail-hating Rishi's neck text of cruelty, whatever that may be. Because there is now no doubt he has got a real downer on the railway, hasn't he? I've even heard it said he'd like to cancel phase 1 of HS2 if he can, and that he still seems to have his beady eye on turning, I don't know, Euston into a couple of platforms and a bus shelter if he can.
Well, he's almost going. The best way to go about really hurting Euston is probably the one that he's doing, actually, which is this sort of private sector partnership, this sort of urban regeneration. I think it's a railway station, guys. It's a railway station, right? And we know that these get more complex and more expensive when you start doing, rights and building on top of them, all the rest of it. So please just focus on getting
a decent station. A
decent station. And if you have a decent station like we got at King's Cross and a decent station like we got at St Pancras, guess what? The development happens around it.
Thing about it is, Richard, a helicopter view normally gives you perspective, doesn't it?
Well, he spends an awful lot of time up in one, that's for sure. Actually,
that's my point.
Yeah, no, okay, thank you. I'll tell you what, though. That gives me an idea. I don't know whether you can even do this. I mean, it must be a matter of public record how many times he uses a helicopter.
Oh, yeah.
To go from places about 10 miles apart. So presumably, if we can find that out, somebody smart can work out just how many tons of CO2 he would have saved had he actually gone by train.
Indeed. So if there's any green signals out there who can do that sort of thing, we can do our bit to try and find out how many times he's gone by a whirlybird rather than by train. And let's create a stick to beat him enthusiastically with if we possibly can.
But I mean, I completely agree. That would be terrific. Back to your point about what's he going to do next. I mean, we don't know. I always try and see the other side of arguments. Because sometimes if you do that, you realize that the side you were first on was right after all. But if you want to try and look at the other side of the argument, you could say, well, when he was at the Treasury, obviously during the pandemic, the railway cost an absolute fortune to support. And that's true. But that's not the railway's fault, right? That wasn't because the railway suddenly did something spectacularly wrong.
No.
It was part of a wider sort of public health strategy. So I'm sorry, that's not an excuse. It is almost as if these advisors, as you say, I mean, people talk about the Tufton Street cabal and all the rest of it. I mean, whatever it is. I don't know what degrees they've got or in what subjects they're in or what things they've ever actually run in their lives. I suspect not very much at all. But they simply do not understand the importance of the railway to this country's infrastructure, society, growth, and all the rest of it. And I fear where the next thing is coming from.
Peter Hendy always describes the railway's role really well, doesn't he, about the economy and houses and jobs and taking people back and forth to where they want to go, but they just don't get it. And I don't think they want to. He just sees it as a cost. And you're right, during the pandemic, it was 800 million per month about was going on the railway. And they just, I think, doing the best to claw it back. They regard it as some sort of grant that was made because of the railway's stupidity. No, they crashed the economy for a public health reason. And, all those contracts evaporated overnight. And in March 2020, the railways were effectively nationalised, though the mainstream media and a lot of railway critics don't seem to have cottoned on to that yet.
No.
Oh, so we'll just have to wait and see and blaze away at him when he does his next stupid thing.
Indeed so. Okay, so finally, then our quiz. We mentioned this at the beginning of the show, and we thought it'd be fun just that each week we'd pose a simple question. Might be topical, might be controversial, might be historical. Who knows? But the first person to send us the correct answer, either by a YouTube comment or on Twitter, hopefully we'll be able to time these things so we can see who was first. We'll have a look at that. If it doesn't quite work, we'll do it a bit differently. Who knows? If it proves popular, maybe we'll even have a prize. But for now, the first person we'll give them a shout out on next week's show. So here's this week's question: the London and North Western Railway branch line from Greenfield to Delft closed in 1955 to passengers and 1963 to freight. By what nickname was it known? So that's your question. First to reply gets a shout out.
Greenfield's a bit local for, we know it, Rich. Is that Oldham way?
Yeah, so I lived in Uppermill for a while, which is just down the road from Greenfield. So yeah, it's sort of first part of Saddleworth, really. Very nice.
Well, we'll see if we get any answers.
Indeed.
Okay, and that's about all we've got time for this week. We hope you've enjoyed this new magazine show. Our big interview episode this week is all about freight. And we were very lucky to have not one but two titans. That's a good word, Richard.
It is a good word, that. I like that, yeah.
Titans of the rail freight world. And I think they both quite like being called titans, even if they sort of poo-pooed it. Two titans, I'm saying it again, of the rail freight world on the show. Maggie Simpson, director of the Rail Freight Group, and John Smith, managing director of GB Rail Freight. And it's a complete riot, as one would expect, especially when John Smith gets anywhere near a microphone with his cans of Diet Coke and his phone going off and banging the table and goodness knows what else. But that's John all over. He was a fantastic interviewee, as was Maggie. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up or subscribe so you get notifications when new episodes are available. And as we do more and more, that's the best way to ensure you never miss anything new. And we do not want you to miss anything new. So, till next time, it's goodbye from me, Nigel Harris in Lincolnshire, and
goodbye from me, Richard Bowker, now in Wiltshire.
Exactly. Bye for now.